Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Our guest today is Jennifer Crumpley. Jen is the author, along with Penelope Moore, of Reaching Our Neediest Children, bringing a mental health program into the schools. Jen's background includes advanced clinical social work and family therapy. She has held leadership positions as an administrator in organizations serving children and families in need of mental health services. She has also held numerous leadership roles inside service-based organizations and has served for 3 years as a first vice president of the National Association of Social Workers, the New York chapter. And she has been a prolific volunteer in the New York City community. Jennifer is presently an independent practitioner. She maintains a private therapy practice on Staten Island, working with children, adults, and families. And she also offers sessions providing mindfulness practices, meditation techniques, and pranic healing. Jennifer Crumpley, welcome to the Success Insight podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This is very exciting.
Well, fantastic. I love the type of work that you're doing in this book. And I have to say, I'm a little surprised that as important as this book is, that there even needs to be this book, because I've always thought that these types of services were already in the schools. And I guess I'm wrong, because you and Penelope Moore set out to produce this wonderful book. So what I was hoping you could do, share a little bit about your background, then let's kind of ease into the book, how it's been constructed, and really why it's such an important book that is needed today in our schools. So let's start with you.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's obvious you've been reading about me because I did, in fact, have a private practice in Staten Island. I'm currently living in Decatur, Georgia. I moved here recently, and I continue to be an independent practitioner. And my background is in social work. I actually began my career in nursing. I've always had an interest in being of service to others. But I changed my degree and went into psychology and eventually became a social worker. And my plan to be of service to others came out of watching my parents when I was growing up. My father was a minister, a pastor of several churches. My mother was always involved in community with young people, and they did so much work in the community. In fact, my father had the opportunity to have his congregants at one time to raise monies to build a community center. That was something that served the community for many decades. And my mother was well known with youth. She led the young people's department in the church. So I had a lot of information to go on when it came to service.
That was certainly the family business in a way, is being of service to the community through the ministry.
Absolutely.
Now, did you continue the ministry yourself? Because I seemed, in my research, I seem to recall that you are also, besides being a social worker and a therapist and getting into the private practice aspects of your work, you're still very much into the ministry.
Yes, I am. I'm an ordained interfaith minister. I graduated in 2009.
Okay.
So that's something that I'm very proud of also.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for sharing this information, about your background and with your parents and the ministry and their work. What then led you into the social work field? It is a tough field because you are like on the front lines of being a mental health worker. So what led you to that?
Well, I was thinking about going into psychology after I changed my career from nursing. And actually, I'm a little lazy. I did not want to go on to get a PhD. So I began to research social work. And in fact, one of my college professors suggested that I do a volunteer internship at a hospital in Brooklyn. And that's what actually was the greater influence for me to go into social work. And then she suggested a particular graduate school for me to attend, which was Columbia University School of Social Work. And that's where I was able to go.
Fantastic. And your work in the city and within these organizations, is that where this discovery or this insight that there was a need that was not being filled or that requires this book? Because you've been in the career for a long time, got a very well-established career. What was kind of it's the insight that there's a need here that's not being met, or was the need being met, but through our funding of federal, state, local government, that the needs of the mental health for our children just it was not first and foremost in the annual budget numbers. So I'm curious how that has evolved in then the writing of this book.
Well, actually, these types of programs have been around for quite a long time. In New York City, school-based mental health programs were implemented approximately 1984. And then there are all types of programs that are in schools. There are even community schools and a different variety of school-based support services. But the need for this particular book, it is really a one-of-a-kind book because it outlines how do you set up these programs? What are the steps to implementing these programs and maintaining them and sustaining them? Looking at what are the obstacles that get in the way of going into a school setting and having these programs to take root, because the literature about these programs in this type of format is just not there. Even one of the publishers that was interested in thinking about publishing our book when we first began talking about it said there was enough out there written about children's needs and various issues that they're dealing with, but there's nothing there that speaks to how do you get these programs up and running, and what do you need to do to maintain and sustain them?
It's kind of like it's a DIY for schools in a way. What was the status of the programs and getting them started up? Was there issues associated with it? I mean, they had the programs, services were being delivered, but was it the schools were just kind of struggling once they had it to keep it running and viable, and trying to understand that angle of it?
Well, it's really difficult to be in a school setting because they are complex institutions. They are part of large bureaucracies. So sometimes there are issues just around space, giving up space for a program that's a non-academic program. There can be issues around Department of Education employees thinking that they might have to take on more work when a new program is coming in. Even this quote-unquote stigma of providing mental health services in schools, that's something that we are always asked about. What does this mean for children when it's known that they're receiving mental health services? And I really have to back up a bit about the writing of this book and the need for this book, because this book didn't come from me in terms of my original thinking. I was running a very large outpatient mental health clinic in Manhattan, and we had 16 high schools that we put social workers in, providing therapy in those schools. So they were young people and young adults were coming to the outpatient clinic as well as receiving therapy in schools. They might have been different populations, but these were the services we were offering in Manhattan. And my staff psychiatrist, Patricia Leff, who I dedicated the book to, really wanted to write about these children that she would see when they came to her for a psychiatric evaluation. And she knew enough about the children and the youngsters and the young adults, but she knew nothing about running programs. And she asked me to be her co-author. We began writing a proposal, and it was accepted, and we had one meeting. We didn't even begin to put words through the paper. And approximately 2 weeks after that one meeting, Patty called me and said she was terminally ill.
Oh, my.
And she asked me to commit to writing this book, and I told her that I would. I told her, I promised her I would write this book. And within an hour, her husband called me to tell me that I made Patty so happy that I had promised to write this book. So it's been a labor of love.
That is a true gift.
Thank you.
That's a true gift. And so now there's this call to action to write the book. Tell me more about your co-author, Penelope Moore.
Penelope Moore has a doctorate in social work, and sometimes I'll refer to her as Penny. So that's how I think of her. And it happened that she called me, I believe, for just some feedback. She was actually involved in writing an article with someone else. And after we finished our conversation, I said, Penny, I have this task to write a book. And it just happened that Penny herself was a director of school-based mental health services some time back. That's how I ever first met her. We met at meetings. And I asked her if she would be my co-author, and she readily agreed. She's the person who has provided all of the theoretical research as evidenced by her references. She wrote the theory, the theoretical information. She wrote the introduction, the conclusion, and she helped me to organize my thinking. This book, the way it's structured, would not have looked this way without Penny's input. And I wrote all the chapters and substantive information and the case study. But Penny was a calming force, and she made recommendations such as having the foreword written by Robert Schachter. He also has a doctorate, and he was at that time the executive director of the National Association of Social Workers New York City chapter, and he was so helpful in writing an eloquent foreword. And she also suggested getting testimonials, so Cheryl Bash, EDD, and Mildred Antonelli, PhD, contributed.
Wow. I mean, that's quite a testament to the importance of other people's perception of the need for this book and what this book can become. You know, what I loved about the book, and Jen, I am a process type of person. That's how I think, is step one, step two. I don't just kind of jump in and let the cards fall where they may. And what I loved about the book and your organization is you've kind of, to me, it was process driven. You know, what do your mental health professionals need to know about the planning or the roles or the day-to-day operations? Is that a part of the conversation that you were having with Penny and with some of the other folks that were, helping to kind of organize and review the book and give you feedback?
Oh, absolutely. There are 13 chapters to the book, and each of the chapters, except the first one, begins with what does a mental health professional need to know about? And the first chapter is, who are our neediest children? And the second is, what does a mental health professional need to know about planning prior to introducing a mental health program into the public school setting? And it goes on to need to know about the roles of relevant school personnel upon entering the school, about day-to-day program operations in order to sustain the program, about the annual startup of the new school year, about identifying students who will receive program services, about counseling students in the program, about confidentiality and informed consent, about assessment and intervention, about supervising a school-based mental health worker, about supervising social work, psychology, and mental health counseling interns, about staff turnover, and last, about summer activities.
Very comprehensive. And if a school wants to implement a program, or maybe I should ask you, your ideal readers for this book or the consumers for this book, is it schools that don't yet have a program, or maybe have a program where it's struggling and perhaps need to go back to the blackboard, so to speak? It's a school, and essentially go through this process one more time to say, okay, how well are we doing here? What are we doing well in each one of these areas? And then figure out where they need to start to kind of fix the things maybe that aren't working as well as they could.
I think that's an excellent question about the program and the need for it in this book. Who is the target population? Because we want this book to go to mental health professionals who are beginning these programs for the most part and need some guidance. And this is the type of book I wish I had when I was running programs. Or if they're already in the school, certainly they can use it for a refresher. Social work students or graduate students who are placed in schools and doing this type of work, this would be ideal, those persons. And also for persons who are maybe replacing an administrator of a school-based mental health program, and they are new to doing this work or just want to think about how to go about it. And there are all types of tips in this book that can be used by other programs. Certainly, not just for school-based mental health services, but an individual going into the school can learn something from this book, or other organizations can use this book. And I personally don't think a school-based mental health program is a panacea. We can work collaboratively and complement other programs that exist in schools because there's so many school-based support services. And this is really about the mental health professional and the organization that is bringing this service into the school, because this is not necessarily an educational service. It doesn't come from the educational end. It comes from the mental health end and those clinics and or agencies and or hospitals that can provide the therapist.
Is there I'm going to use the word friction, and perhaps that's too strong a word, but is it maybe a not understanding what a program's like this, what its benefit is to the population of students who are attending the school, that there's this misinformation? Is that common within the interaction between the education side and the mental health side at the school level?
Yes, that's something that we have to look out for, because so often the educational persons may not know what mental health services mean. They don't know what these services consist of. They may not know who are the children that need to be referred to us unless we make that clear. Sometimes when the work isn't understood, that can create an obstacle to getting the work done effectively. For example, if a guidance counselor doesn't refer the child to a school-based mental health worker, that's going to be a problem. If that guidance counselor is the person by which the referred children are routed so that the school-based mental health worker has a caseload of children, if the guidance counselor doesn't understand the need or doesn't want to participate, as an example, then services don't happen in the way that they should.
If the school says we need help, here's a great resource, how do they begin to tap into getting that assistance? Or do they read the book and they're on their own? Or do you, maybe Penny, somebody else, do you go into the schools and consult and help them implement this?
It really begins with the Department of Education, and depending on how that's set up in any city or state. In New York City, there's a district office. So it starts there with having an understanding and collaboration with the Department of Education.
Okay. And given that this book has been out for a little while, it was published in 2016, the school boards, the departments of education that perhaps have a copy of this book and they've taken steps to implement one or more aspects depending on what their need is, what are you hearing back from them about how this book has enabled them to perhaps change direction in an improved way or made adjustments that have increased the impact of providing the service and really kind of seeing that return on, I hate to use the term investment, but the return on investment of we need this program, this is a good use of funds that are coming into the school, and what are you hearing from them as a result of using this book and consuming it to start or to improve a program?
I wish I had an answer to that question, because I haven't had that type of feedback. I've had feedback from only a couple of individuals. So it's really hard to get this book known in the way that I would like for it to get known. But we certainly have submitted it to New York City, to the mayor's wife, as an example, because she developed Thrive New York City, which includes mental health services for children in schools, and other programs have looked at this book. Some persons in leadership within the Department of Mental Health have access to this book. How it's been effective within school systems, I do not have that information. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. It just begs another question. If our goal, your goal, Penny's goal, my goal is to help you get this book into as many of the right hands as possible, who needs to have this book?
Persons who are in leadership positions within the Department of Mental Health and in leadership positions in the Department of Education.
Okay. And let's say we can get the book in front of them. What's the conversation that you would want to have with them once they have this book on their desk and we're going to let them know you need to read this book? You need to listen to this podcast, for that matter. What's the next conversation that you and Penny want to have?
I want them to know that using this book helps to bring services in the school in a strategic manner, not in a haphazard way, because these children that are coming to school, they're coming to schools with all sorts of issues, life situations, and they're not getting the psychological, emotional, social, or spiritual support that they need. And what I've learned in this work, and I'm sure Penny can say the same, it only takes one child to disrupt the classroom. And some of these teachers are up against 2 and 3 children, and they're not able to teach. And the students that want to learn are not learning when you have disruptive children. And these are children that are acting out or demonstrating negative attention-seeking behavior because they don't know what to do with their feelings. So if you want to have a well-functioning school, you have to have a well-functioning child. And that's what I would want them to know, that these services help everyone in the school setting because they're helping the child that needs to be able to focus on learning and to feel good about himself or herself.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Jennifer, I would love to maybe shift gears just a little bit. It's still about the books, but so you had this call to action by it was Dr. Leff, correct?
Yes.
And so then you set out to write the book with Penny Moore. What was your kind of aha moments with writing this book? I mean, how have you changed as a result of this book?
You know, I wrote something for myself, and I didn't have to actually as a reminder, but it was expect the unexpected. That's what came to me. Even with this work, expect the unexpected. Looking
back when you changed directions from nursing into social work, if you could encapsulate this, and I know it's difficult and kind of puts you on the spot, but looking back at what you've accomplished, and now you've got this wonderful book out there and career, what are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of the work I've done in running programs and training others to do this work in schools. Sometimes I hear from my former supervisees and the way that I've supervised them. A couple of them have remained friends over these many years. I still hear from people who reach out to me, from time to time. I've mentored a couple of persons that I've supervised in the past. And just the fact that so many children were helped. I have to tell you, a young man came up to me 20 years later and called me by my former married name. No one really knows my former married name. And he remembered me from the work. So I think that we've touched children in so many different ways. And one of my proudest achievements is going into the classrooms working with children around grief issues. And that was something I was trained in, and I was able to train some of my supervisees in going into whole classrooms, bringing a curriculum, a 6-session curriculum into classrooms and working with children, sitting with death and dying issues.
That's wonderful. Wonderful. Before we bring our podcast to a close, and before we make sure we have all the links to your website and social sites identified, your background, and I had stated this right at my intro in the beginning, you're now doing work and offering sessions to children, adults, and families on mindfulness practices, meditation techniques, pranic healing. How did that evolution in your career come about?
I've always been interested in spiritual growth, and I began a meditation practice some years ago for my own personal purposes, and began to seek out a way of, enhancing my skills instead of just reading about it and doing meditation at home. And then I brought it into the therapy session just as something different. It just clicked with some young people. I remember I was working with an 8-year-old, and he was Orthodox and Jewish, and he went home to his grandfather, and he said, I told my grandfather I could do something you don't know how to do. He was so proud of learning how to meditate to help him to go to sleep. So it's just fascinating work. I was using it personally, and I took a chance. When I was a consultant, I decided to start meetings, beginning with a meditation for the directors and some of the supervisees in that particular agency. I said, I'm just going to do this. I'm not going to ask permission. I'm going to start each meeting with sitting, with focusing on our bodies and our breath. And they loved it. It's just something to be shared. It was working for me, and I thought it would work for others.
Fantastic. I have to share with you, there's a coaching colleague here in Chicago, and she's very much into providing tutoring, mentoring to young, disadvantaged kids. And part of that has been the meditation, teaching them how to meditate. And they use the labyrinths. There's a church here in Chicago, I believe it's called First Presbyterian. They have this massive labyrinth in their sanctuary, and it's one of the tools that she has been familiar with and an expert in. They go on pilgrimages around the world looking for labyrinths. Has that ever been a part of your mindfulness meditation practices? When I saw the introduction on the notes about you and writing them up, that's the first thing that came to my mind. I wonder if she walks labyrinths.
No, but I've always wanted to. I used to cross a labyrinth in Union Square. There was one that was, was a crayon or whatever, and I would want to do that, but was too self-conscious to do it in front of a bunch of Manhattanites. But certainly I really appreciate the use of it. I understand the need for it and how wonderful it is. And one of these days I'm going to do it. You just reminded me.
I'll tell you what, I will introduce you to Janice, and I'll ask her, I'll invite her to listen to the podcast as well. And hey, you'll make a new friend and you'll add another element to your practice. So if you're okay with that, I'm happy to do that.
I'm okay with that. Believe me. Thank you.
Very good. Well, listen, Jen, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where's the best places for them to go?
They can go to Jennifer at jennifercrumpley.com. And Crumpley is spelled C-R-U, M as in Mary, P as in Peter, L-E-Y.
Okay. And your website is jennifercrumpley.com, and we'll certainly provide links to that as well. And your book is on Amazon. It's on Kindle. It's in hardcover, paperback, so we'll certainly provide a link to it. Are there any social sites that are important?
Facebook.com/Reaching Our Neediest Children, and LinkedIn.
Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. And you're on LinkedIn because that's how we found you. And we'll provide a link to LinkedIn as well and to Facebook. And Jennifer, I really appreciate you taking the time to share this passion, really this wonderful career you've had of making a difference to young children and in schools and, for families and adults, et cetera. Such a book that's needed. And hopefully we can, kind of help you raise the folks' awareness who need to have this book on their table so they can help improving the delivery of mental health services, for kids in our schools. So thank you so much for joining us today on the Success Insight podcast.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Fantastic. All right, folks, we have just been chatting with Jen Crumpley. She is the author, along with Penelope Moore, of Reaching Our Neediest Children, bringing a mental health program into the schools. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast, and please let us know by either liking or commenting on our website, successinsightpodcast.com. If you have found us on one of the podcast players, Buzzsprout, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, we welcome any likes and comments again about the episode. You can also find us on YouTube, on Facebook, and on LinkedIn. Really also a wonderful conversation today, really about a topic that's so very important for young kids in our schools and the need for really comprehensive mental health services, one that is attuned not only to their scholastic education, but also to their mental health and wellness. So really a great book to help the schools and leaders within education and within the mental health community really kind of come together and to create and sustain a wonderful program that meets that kind of a need for kids and for their families. So folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day, and we will see you on the next episode of the Success Insight podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.